that the deal? Oh, there it is.
There we are. And we are live, actually, folks. Zoom has decided to turn it on for us. So we still have a minute or so. So if you've joined us, we really appreciate you joining us. But we got 8:59 here in Oregon, according to Apple time. So we go with Apple time. So it gives us about 60 seconds and allow some other folks to join. But great to see so many attendees coming in already. We hope you're having a great day so far wherever you are in the world.
All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Lise Massey, and today's webinar, Supporting Data Literacy Efforts with Self-Service BI, is brought to you by the International Institute for Analytics, otherwise known as IIA, as well as Metric Insights. To give you some background on IIA, we are the industry's leading source of expertise for companies making the transition to data-driven decision-making and advanced analytics. We offer 4 unbiased client-oriented services designed to help organizations across the entire analytics lifecycle from ideation through strategy and planning to operationalization. These services are the Research and Advisory Network, the Analytics Leadership Consortium, Analytics Maturity Assessments, as well as our advisory services. If you want to learn a little more, you can do so at iianalytics.com/services. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to cover a few housekeeping items. We will be accepting questions throughout the presentation, which you can submit in the chat window as we go, and we'll have time to revisit those at the end of the presentation. Also, a recorded version of this webinar will be available and emailed out after the presentation for you to watch on demand and share with your team. With that said, I'd like to welcome our speakers. Marius Moscovici is the founder and CEO of Metric Insights and has over 20 years.
We're resolving some technical issues right now, so everything should be back up.
All right, sorry guys, can everybody hear me now? I'm looking at our panelists. If you can give me the thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. So let's go ahead and just go back to where we were. So before we get started, I want to just take a moment to cover a few housekeeping items. We will be accepting questions throughout the presentation, which you can submit in the chat window as we go, and we'll have time to revisit those at the end of the presentation. Also, a recorded version of this webinar will be available and emailed out after the presentation for you to watch on demand and share with your team. With that said, I'd like to welcome our speakers. Marius Moscovici is the founder and CEO of Metric Insights and has over 20 years of experience in analytics and data warehousing, and was previously the co-founder and CEO of Integral Results, a leading BI consulting company. And he has also formed and led the data warehousing and real-time analytics group at Linden Lab. Shilpam Pandey has over 20 years of experience in data analytics and establishing large data programs to improve decision-making and business outcomes. She has extensive experience in data product and program management, data governance, BI and analytics with deep agile and design thinking experience. Shilpam has a background in consulting and has led cross-functional teams in financial services, life sciences, and healthcare. John Michael has led analytic teams for over 35 years, including HR analytics, large call center resource management and forecasting, customer loyalty measurement, and sales and performance management. He led the development and recent launch of the Enterprise Data Literacy Program for a Fortune 100 financial services company. John also serves on the Program Advisory Board at St. Joseph's and has taught graduate level business analytics there since 2011. And finally, we have Drew Smith, who is the Vice President of the Analytics Leadership Consortium here at IIA and has over 20 years of global experience working on both the business side of analytics, leveraging insights for business performance, and on the delivery side of analytics, driving the use of enterprise analytics. All right, so with that said, Drew, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And again,
Drew, we lost your audio again. Sorry, folks, we're having some technical issues. They're going to reconnect shortly, I think.
So we're going to unmute me. And I get the thumbs up from Marius, and I am turning very red because I'm quite embarrassed, but I am still enthusiastic about the content we have, so we're going to move on to that. So we talk about people, process, and technology in this industry a lot. We think that those things need to work in balance. We're going to cover data literacy today, and it's a quite broad topic. I'm not even going to weed into the weeds of how to define that. It's a very many different definitions. And there are actually many different ways to do data literacy wrong, but our understanding, speaking to experts like Shilpan and John, as well as experts who are thought leaders in the world, is that there's only one right way to do it, and that's in context. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're specifically going to talk about the fact that there are 3 contextual areas to think about your data literacy program, and we'll talk about how technology can support you in that. So we're going to cover the contextual area of the business, the contextual area of the people, and the contextual area of the organization. So in these contexts, you can actually make the data literacy come alive, be relevant, and actually lead towards a competitive advantage. So let's talk about that first one. So data literacy desperately needs a business context. What we mean by this is to send people to a classroom and have them memorize definitions is probably a recipe for disaster, which you very well know. But some things you might want to think about is actually increasing the strength of the connection of any data literacy efforts into running programs. And some of these programs you own, some you might influence, but they all should be really recognizable to people in the business that this is a big part of what the company's trying to do. Sometimes it's as amorphous as digitalization efforts. Sometimes it could be very concrete. If you're a retailer, it could be about, improving penetration in certain digital channels. It's also really good actually in the business context to make data literacy a part of the goal setting and the problem statement framing. And I think the person who I would love to have us start off with this business context question is John, who, as Lise had mentioned, is from a very large financial services company and has quite a bit of experience embedding literacy into business context. So John, share some examples, if you would, about how you've used these programs to be successful.
Thank you, Drew. And actually, if it wasn't for the business context, I don't think we would do something like a data literacy program. Why would we even approach it if there wasn't some sort of organizational outcome? So we'll see business outcomes like having a common language around data allows project team members to be able to converse with each other in a very data-driven and data-informed way. We're not spending time trying to understand where are you coming from, where are you coming from, how do you define that, how do I define that? So that's an important business outcome is being on that same page, having that common language. Another important outcome is that with a strong sense of data literacy, people will have a bigger sense of data quality and the importance of data quality. So data literacy can really impact all organizational priorities. In our program, we started by identifying some strategic projects that could benefit from that shared language. And let's be real, you can't find a strategic project that does not have a significant data component. So it's relatively easy to find those types of programs and projects that would benefit from that shared language. So in our program, we picked a handful of them. We're really just starting, a couple of months into this right now, but we picked a handful of strategic projects and did some interventions or engagements with those project teams to help them establish a common framework and a common language when it comes to speaking about data. So you think about that basic vocabulary. We are using a vocabulary that came out of the Data Lodge around the value, which is certainly the business context, the information, and the analysis. And typically any project team that we have is going to have experts in one of those three areas, but probably no one that is an expert in all three of them. So establishing that common framework for them helps them then to apply the data literacy concepts to their individual project. And we've seen a lot of success with that early on in our engagements here. So that would be our approach to the business context.
Excellent, John. Thanks very much. And I think, have you any idea on maybe sort of what are some of the big projects? What's sort of are there any attributes that you would say people should look for in those big projects? As you said, you could almost theoretically connect any big corporate project these days to data, but are there certain attributes you think are essential?
Yeah, actually, I think the attributes are less about the project itself and more around the people and the leadership. If you've got strong leaders for those projects that say, yes, I can see the benefit, I can see the business outcomes of this, they're going to be more supportive and in getting those projects off the ground with data literacy. And I have one example, without getting into too much detail, of a time where we had a disconnect, where we had a senior level group for a particular project that was on board, went through an engagement around data literacy, and then just told the next level to show up. And that level didn't really understand why they were there. So they were missing that business context of why they were there. So that was a learning that we had. So make sure, number one, is that the leadership for the project can see that direct line between the outcomes of that project from a data literacy perspective and the outcomes needed from a strategic project.
Excellent, excellent. And Shilpan, what might you add to John's words of wisdom about finding the right person in that project as much as finding the right project? And it could be that my disease of unmuting has spread across.
Can you hear me?
We do.
I switched my video off because I was worried about the connectivity issues, but I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you, Shilpan.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with John. Yes, data is universal, right? I think of it as the fabric that weaves an organization together. It's data, and data literacy really is that language that connects it, but it's about the people, it's about the leadership. And I think that's a critical component in terms of identifying which projects to go after. And your earlier point about data literacy needing a business context, I think that's critical because data doesn't exist in isolation. For our data literacy program, for example, we don't own the setup of the governance process or the data delivery or the data catalog and things like that. But we're in the business of helping businesses find solutions using data. It's about our job is to make sure that businesses are using data effectively for the right purpose, to solve the right problems, whatever the business imperatives or the business objectives might be, whether it's to drive innovation or growth or whatever other objectives are. But yeah, data literacy for us exists in that business context. Is a critical factor. I see data literacy as part of a broader ecosystem. It doesn't exist in isolation, but nor is it the entire ecosystem. So putting it in context with business people and leaders, like you said earlier, is critical.
Yeah, thanks, Shilpan. Thanks, John, as well. Marius, we know that actually really good wisdom there integrated into big programs, building it into the business context. You guys at Metric Insights have a point of view on how technology can enable that. I wonder if you could take us through a few areas where you see, I like Shilpan's thing, the knitting. How does this help the knitting of data literacy be woven into the fabric of how people work?
Sure, Drew. Thank you. I think that one of the foundational pieces that you need to have in place, whatever technology you use, but to support, that business context that John and Shilpa talked about is the ability to really see all your analytics through the lens of that context, right? So, one of the problems if you think about how we consume analytics today is that you're kind of consuming a one-off, going different places, and you're not really seeing that context. You're not really seeing that shared framework that gives you an understanding of how this fits into the overall overarching business context for the enterprise. So, something like, from a knitting perspective, as you said, we see as the first step really to collect everything that you have, all the key analytics that you want to share with users into a catalog, and in a visual and an organized way, present that to users so that, with security enabled and so forth, I'm able to see the things that I should be able to consume. I can see what content is certified. Maybe there's a little certification icon on there, and I've got everything organized by category. It's all taggable. It's all accessible for me so that I can understand contextually what I'm looking at. And then if you kind of go to the next slide, the further step is when I'm going to consume the analytic, you need to be able to layer that context along with that consumption experience. So, whatever, and that falls into a number of different categories, right? But it all stems from the idea that I don't want to be able to, I don't want this information, the information I need to be literate with that content, to be divorced from the content. It needs to be wrapped around the content, creating a layer around that, if you like, such that I can then engage with it and understand the right context. So some examples you're seeing just in this screenshot, for example, at the top, I'm being told that, yes, I'm looking at this visualization. I think in this case it's Tableau, but it really doesn't matter what it is. I need to know when I'm looking at it that, hey, there's a delay in collecting of the data. So that's an example of something that helps me with my literacy. That way I'm looking at this data. If there's a number that's off from what I would expect it, I know that, well, I should need to come back to this after 2 o'clock today when that data is going to be refreshed, because right now there were some issues with the data. It's not correct. So if I'm reading this data, I'm making an error in interpreting it. Right. Similarly, if there's in this display here, you can see for certification information, should know, who certified this data, who was the technical owner, the data steward, when was it certified, and then other sort of classification information. It gives me the context to be literate. So does this contain PII data? Because I'm going to maybe treat that visualization differently that way. Who owns the organization? Does it contain sensitive data? Right. So all these things are very important to be able to promote as a user, be able to enable me to be literate with this visualization. So furthermore, if you see here, you've got this idea that John talked about this as well, to kind of conceptually tying all these initiatives to business value. Well, the same approach should really come to approach should apply to visualizations, where I want to have key terms, key business terms that are going to help me understand what I'm looking at. Those things should be tagged associated with the visualization, and then I need to be able to see that information directly when I'm looking at this visualization. So here you can see there's a tag that says that enterprise churn is associated with this visualization. I should be able to click on that tag, see the description, what is the defined definition of this, agreed upon definition of enterprise churn, who are the owners of that, in case I have a question, I can click and see that. And then what is the other content that uses that same definition. So if I'm looking at this and this is a really interesting visualization, I find something useful, I should be able to in a natural way, kind of progress from that to find other things that are written on the same topic, if you like, right? Other things that that are associated with enterprise churn that I can explore further. And that promotes that literacy effort. And then, finally, one of the things to consider from a technology perspective is that you don't really, this thing just doesn't happen by magic, right? So you're not going to be able to just have all these definitions, the glossaries, the even release notes and other kind of pieces of information and promote literacy around a piece of content. That you need to have a process that enables that, and then you have to figure out some way to enable that technology, whether, you can, many different ways you can do this, but some mechanism by which when content gets published, it goes through a step-by-step process. Through each step of the process, the right person within the organization assigns a proper piece of information to that content to enable literacy, whether that's associating those tags, whether it's certifying the content, whether it's associating release notes, and that there can be multiple parties involved in that, and can be a simple or a more complex process depending upon the nature of the content. But in either case, it needs to be designed. So it has to be a very thoughtful approach by which you ensure that the content that you share with your users has the proper layer of contextual information to promote effective data literacy.
And actually, I'm going to take a brief pause, Marius, and not jump into the next one where Shilpa is going to take us on a lead on the next one. But I wanted actually to revisit, because you covered something in these slides, which also is coming through in chat, and it's important, I think, for yourself and for Shilpa and John to reinforce. It's not simply about knowing. It's great to know, again, going back to your example, that yes, the data pipeline of Snowflake is delayed. That's very valuable. And to know why Snowflake is important in your technical ecosystem is important. But equally as important was that example that you shared with what is churn, right? So churn is actually an interesting combination of business literacy and data literacy, right? You have to know why churn matters to your company, because it's expensive to get new customers, and you want to retain the customers you have. And that might be actually on a wall somewhere in your office if you ever go back to an office, 100% retention of customers. But it's also important that you know how that churn is calculated, and that's more what people think. But what I hear from the panelists, and John or Shilpa, you can jump in, is this intersection of how the math works, churn equals number of clients over blah, 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 divided by blah, 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 in time span, blah, 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 is as important as what churn is. So I think it's important to reinforce that notion of business and data literacy intertwined. And to your point, Marius, that's actually the option that folks have with this tool to make sure that the business metrics that matter are properly highlighted in this tool.
Yeah.
So John, would you have anything more to share on that thought?
I would just say, and then I'd love to hear what John and Shilpa have to say, but I would say that, you're absolutely right. You cannot divorce the two. And I would think about for a moment, just take it out of the technology realm, but just think about how we consume even media today, right? We are on our Kindle, perhaps we're reading something. If there is a word that we're not sure how it is defined, you tap on that word and you can, pops up a definition. In the old days, we might look in a dictionary, right? But the idea is that it's immediately accessible to me as a user to clarify what something means. And that shared meaning is very important, because if I don't understand, not necessarily from a technical perspective, but from both a business and a technical perspective, how something is defined, then I may have an interpretation of the information that is completely inaccurate, right? Mm. And therefore, we failed at being able to establish data literacy.
Yeah, I'll jump on here. That I was going to mention this a little bit later in the presentation, but our program has three big components. There's an engagement component, a development component, and then an enablement component. And I think a lot of what you were showing, Marius, falls into that enablement component, where having that, I'll call it a tooltip, where you hover over something, see the definition, can find out where that data came from, what's the data lineage, all those kinds of tools then enable us to be more data literate and be able to make those data-driven decisions on that same platform where we're all speaking the same language. So I think that's extremely critical there to make that business connection.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that data literacy is not just for hands-on data people, right? Our data community manager, she likes to say that everyone is a data person. Some just don't know it yet. And it goes to the broader conversation that we were having about that common language. It's about understanding about business, or everyone understanding data in context, right? The Kindle example that we just talked about, or the churn example that Marius, you mentioned, these are great examples of the need for having that common language, that common understanding, to make sure that we are all talking about, or we're saying, looking at the same things, that we are on the same page.
Yeah, excellent. And Shilpan, you already said one of, I think, something that should be repeated because I've mentioned to you before. I love that phrase that everyone's a data person. They just don't know it yet. But one of the things that you are keen on, and I agree to, is what kind of data person are you, right? So data literacy could definitely be viewed and should be viewed as a universal thing, right? It is, whether it's, using that pop-up on the Kindle or whether you're trying to buy a new home, in which case you have some really fancy data tools you need to use to find that home. It's part of everyone's everyday life. It is a little bit intimidating for some people, though, and it needs to be something that is continuously developing. And you need to invest in what we would call fun over fear, right? So sometimes people, if they get told they have to do data literacy or analytics literacy, they have flashbacks to failing math in high school. Not that you guys failed math in high school, but there are probably a couple people on the call, and there are definitely lots of people out in the business world who maybe didn't do so well in high school math. So Shilpan, share with us a bit how you've used the concept of personas or individuals or groups to make it easier for everyone to become that data person that is inside them.
Yeah, absolutely. Data literacy is critical for everyone, right? Like to your point about whether you're buying a house or, like following COVID dashboards all of last year, for example. Data is a critical component of who we are, what we do on a regular basis. Within an organization, though, we do think data literacy is important for leaders, managers, decision makers, as it is for the hands-on data people. So, the data analysts, the data storytellers, whose job it is to communicate effectively with data using good data storytelling skills, is equally important for those consuming these things being created by the hands-on data people to have that critical mindset to question or ask better questions of their data. Don't just take or use data as an excuse, well, the data said so. It's about appreciating the nuances of things like data does not have all the answers. Sometimes data just tells you where to look or raises more questions, and be comfortable with that. It's okay. And that's key as you build out for us, the data literacy program in terms of understanding how different personas use data, what they need to know. For me, data is sometimes like the blind man and the elephant, when everyone has a different perspective, and it's a genuinely legitimate perspective from their point of view. But it's important to see things in context, what you were talking about earlier, Drew, in terms of data literacy existing in context. Yes, perspectives vary, which is why we have broadly defined the entire organization in different personas based on how they use and interact with data, how they use data for decision making or what they're doing with it. Not everyone needs the same level of fluency with being able to create a beautiful visualization, for example, or be able to write out the best query or build out the best model or what have you, or have the best data wrangling skills. For us, we talk about the concept of a T-shaped person. So with a broad understanding and appreciation of data and the nuances and the mindset to question, to think critically, be curious, and be comfortable with ambiguity, really. To be able to say, I don't know, I'm going to have to look at it and figure that out. To be able to approach data with an open mind, not just to confirm assumptions, because we all know how easy that is. What a person really needs to be able to be successful, say, as a data storyteller, overlaps somewhat with, say, a data engineer or a data scientist, but it's certainly not the same. They have different skill sets that they need to form a complete team. Similarly, on the business side, for example, business line managers need to be able to interpret data and see analysis in context. It's different than, say, a strategic leader who needs to be able to process critically and has that mindset and the literacy to not make assumptions and make common mistakes. Like what I mentioned earlier, it's true because the data says so. It's important for the non-hands data community, going back to the quote that I was referring to from our data community manager. Everybody's a data person, right? But they have a different persona to it. So it's important for the business community or the non-hands-on data people to appreciate nuances like, there's that famous quote from The Economist about if you talk to the data long enough or if you torture it long enough, it confesses to anything. So those kind of nuances or understanding that is critical for everybody in an organization. So for us, personas or literacy based on personas is important. We also focus on different fluency levels needed based on the different skills required for these different personas. even dialects, because sub-personas, so within the broad personas, there are sub-personas, because the dialect needed for, say, somebody in marketing is very different than, say, or certainly slightly different if you're to say a data scientist in marketing is different than if you're a data scientist in operations or some other business group. So not only are there different fluency levels based on personas, but where you are in the organization, you might need a different dialect of the same or the same language, the common language that we all are speaking with. We've taken a very ecosystem or like a systems kind of approach where we see organization really like a living community where there is some personalization for dialects, for regional variations, to be able to have that, to have that vibrant community or an ecosystem going to be able to use data effectively as an organization.
Excellent, thank you, Shilpan. And John, I'm particularly interested a little bit, especially from your experience in such a large company, spread quite broadly across the country. How have you looked upon segmentation or persona development or any other methods to make sure that you don't fall in the trap of people thinking they're being trained to be a data scientist? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being better at using data than you are today, and that means different levels for different people. How have you sliced this cake, or whatever analogy?
I'm really glad you teed it up that way, because one of the things that came to mind when Shilpan was talking is that yes, we've got different levels throughout the organization, and not everyone needs to have the same level of data fluency or data literacy or even data science skills or chops. So that's important to understand. The second thing is that if you've got a PhD in data science, that does not necessarily make you data literate. So if data literacy is the ability to read, write, and communicate in context that we're talking about here, you can have somebody who is phenomenal in the analytics, but is unable to describe the business context or to communicate that to others, so they can go off into their room and do their analytics, but not have that communication. That person wouldn't necessarily be high on the data literacy scale. The way that we approached it, we came up with a relatively simple, non-scientific assessment tool. It's on a survey platform. Anytime we're going to do one of those strategic workshops I mentioned before, we ask people to complete it. It's also on our data literacy hub, so anyone can go to it and complete the assessment. There are about 20 items on the assessment, and when they finish, it gives them a level. There are 4 general levels: the data apprentice, the data detective, the data whisperer, and the data sage. The apprentice would be the one who's just maybe a little bit concerned about their level of data literacy, kind of interested, wants to learn more, knows it might be important. They're just getting started out. They need some guidance. Whereas on the other side of that spectrum, the data sage is going to be that person who's probably the jack of all trades, can speak the value, the business outcome, can understand the analytics and decide which analytics would be appropriate, and has a good sense of where the information is coming from. And then the other categories are somewhere in between. And when people do the assessment, they get their score and they get a recommended learning path. So some skills that they should develop or could develop to help them move along on the path. But I think it's important to say, though, that data literacy programs are not just about training. Training is an important concept or part of it, but it is not all about the training. It's really about the experience and the application back on the job. One other thing I'd like to mention about people, and that is, I feel very, very strongly that we're talking about business context here today. Data literacy is also a community context. And especially at our company, we feel very strongly that the experiences that we have at the office and the training that we have at the office, whether it be around data literacy or diversity and inclusion, or just about anything else around our business, those skills transfer back home and back in the community. And I'm a firm believer that if you just look over the last year with COVID and with politics and other things going on in our world, if as a world we had a higher level of data literacy, we would have fewer people succumbing to fake news and conspiracy theories, because we'd be questioning the data. We'd want to know what the sources are. We'd be able to see whether it passes the sniff test. So we think that we develop data literacy on the job, in the office, but we take that to our church, we take that to our community organizations, we take it home. Everybody has some level of data literacy that they can take outside of the business context.
Yeah, John, that's a really good point. And I know that some people who have, like you guys who have built ambitious programs, have had the right to say to coworkers, look at this benefit we're also giving you, right? We are going to improve your data literacy, which is making you a better equipped data citizen for this data world in which we live. One thing that is, maybe if you guys could give an example, I think it might be a little bit inspiring, but you know, us data people, we aren't necessarily the people you think of as fun. We aren't maybe the first person you invite to the party to rage on. But have you guys any examples where means by which you've made this thing fun? As I say, I think I've noticed fear in people's face when you say we're going to try to upskill in data. But Shilpan, I think you have maybe a story or two about how to make this a little bit more fun.
Yeah, Drew, I don't know what you're talking about. I thought data people were the most fun and the ones that you invited to all the parties. But no, I do hear you. One of the things that I think I'm proudest of is making data cool. And yes, I hear you in terms of people think data and they're like, ah. So for us, you know, there's a lot of, we've experimented. I'm not saying that this works at every organization, but for us, a lot of things, like we've built in a lot of gamification in the process in terms of how we engage with our community. We've taken a really broad approach. To John's point earlier, we all are data people who carry it to our churches, to the communities, or, you know, whatever we are participating in. So making it relatable, whether it's buying a house, that's a very data-driven process. Deciding when and where to go for a picnic is a data-driven process based on whatever factors you might be looking at. So making it very relatable, but also building in a lot of fun. And never underestimate the power of a free T-shirt or a free gift card or, you know, things like that. But make it fun and inviting, very relatable, and, you know, building a little bit of competition tied in with things like how are you solving the broader business problem, or, you know, whatever the context it is that you're trying to put it in, are some things that we've tried, and these are some approaches that have worked effectively for us in making, like I call it, making data cool. Which I thought it always was, but yes, for the broader world. We
start out by talking about the personal side of data before we get into the business side of data. So if I'm doing a workshop, say intro to data literacy, exploring data literacy, we probably spend the first third of it talking about personal examples. And the only preparation that I have people do before they come to the workshop is to think about over the weekend, when was a time that you were very data literate or that you were using data. And I start with an example, and I put up a slide that shows my shuffleboard table that I have in our basement, and a little tick sheet that has my wife's name and my name and the number of times that we want to. It's called the Stay-at-Home Shuffleboard Challenge. So this started about a year ago, and it very quickly shows that she's a much better shuffleboard player than I am. It's not a pretty visualization. You know, it's not, everything isn't all lined up and beautiful. It wasn't created you know, on the computer, but it's effective and it's kind of fun, and people laugh about it, and then they start coming up with some of their own examples. So we try to take some of that fear away. And 9 times out of 10 in these workshops, I'll have people who will say at the beginning of the workshop, I felt like I was a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of my comfort level with data. And afterwards they'll say, you know, I actually use data a lot more than I thought. And they'll come up with the examples of, you know, helping my daughter with the Girl Scout cookie thing, and we're doing all kinds of analytics on, you know, where's the best place to sell, or, you know, managing the kids soccer team, all these other kinds of examples. And when you make it real that way, it takes a lot of the fear out, and then you can translate that very quickly into a business context.
Great, thanks for the tips, guys. we'll keep that in mind. Marius, we know that, I mean, obviously all systems have the ability to sort of use or identify key and with your own unique ID. So that gives a good starting point. But what other methods can you use within Metric Insights in order to reinforce the persona element of the data literacy learning?
Yeah, so I think it kind of starts from, you can only be literate in things that you find that you can access. So you need to be able to, so search, I think, is a key enabler towards literacy, in the sense that if I can search the same ease that I have with Google, where I can find the content that I have, if I can identify, when I'm looking at the content, if I have all the context that's going to tell me what's going on with that, again, certification, key attributes around sensitivity, other information that tells me how I need to engage with that content. That's, I think, a foundational kind of a first step. You need to have that in order to be able to bring all of your content together in a way that people consume it in a literate way. And then if you go forward to the next slide, I think it's about, thinking about this from different personas, as we talked about. So for some personas, literacy is just about understanding, what is this data I'm looking at? A consumer of analytics, consumer reporting. But you have other personas where to be really literate on a particular piece of content, you've got to understand what's going on underneath. You've got to understand the lineage. You've got to understand, how does this data get here? I'm sending this particular piece of content out there. Which dashboard does this come from, and what data source does that come from behind that? And so we see lineage as a key thing, as a key enabler of data literacy at the analyst level, at the more of the data scientist level, the folks that are publishing content. And so that's another sort of important dimension of technical solutions that need to be there to solve to promote data literacy. And then if you advance the next slide, then I think another sort of key thing, of sort of a pillar of this, as you think about it, is how do you know whether you're successful? Right. So, one of the things that's really hard to measure, I mean, obviously you can do surveys and things like that, but on a macro level, as you think about deploying these things broadly in enterprises, and you've got programs, and you're applying technology, how do you know whether you're getting a more literate organization? And I think one measure of that is certainly engagement, right? If people have a high degree of data literacy, they tend to engage with content, and they tend to engage with the right kind of content on a regular basis, because it's helping them, it's answering the right questions for them to be able to do their job. So looking at usage and looking at it through the lens of, what content is trending to be more popular, what content is becoming less popular, what's unused, all these things provide a lens into how effective you are in promoting the literacy around a particular piece of content, and whether there's something needs to be literacy needs to be improved in that area, perhaps adding definitions, usage notes, promoting content, or whether something is just completely missing the mark and has to be reevaluated. So that's another key tool that needs to be there in the toolkit to make these things really sustainable and work long term.
Yeah, Marius, that's super good. So before we go actually into the next phase, I think this measuring thing is something that does get missed, ironically. Data people, we've done large discussions around data upskilling, or even other topics like that. Sometimes these things are less well measured, or the metrics for their success is less well set. So curious, Shilpan and John, I know that in some senses you're at the beginning of your journey, but have you put much thought into sort of what does success look like? What is in identification that your organization is more data literate 6, 12, or 18 months from now? Do you have any sort of feelings for that? Do you have any hardcore statistics? John, you guys have anything in your mind yet?
Well, I don't have hardcore statistics yet, because we are at the beginning of the journey. And it's really a wide variety of types of metrics. So it's certainly, anytime you start a new initiative, there are activity kinds of measures. How many people have completed the assessment? How many have signed up for learning paths? How many have progressed through the different levels? Those kinds of things. And eventually those get replaced with actual changes in outcomes. So can we go into a strategic project and say, because of the engagement in this project, we had an easier time getting to the business value and getting the right kind of outcome from it. So some of those things are a little bit harder to measure. Also, over time, we would expect to see things like more engagement on our data literacy hub and contributions of artifacts in terms of case studies, examples of good visualizations, maybe examples of bad visualizations that were then improved. One of the things that we'll be doing with our self-paced learning programs is actually have people engage on Slack on what they're learning in that self-paced program, and then post something like, here's a dashboard that I evaluated and now can do a better job of either analyzing it or designing or whatever it might be, because I've got these new skills. So as we start to see more of that, that should have a direct improvement and impact on our overall data literacy.
Yeah, those are all good metrics. Chopin, have you anything to add on those, or?
Yeah, we're also fairly early in our journey, and we do, some of the business value work in terms of the value that businesses have seen from the data literacy. We have this whole proof of concept data concierge kind of service, where it's about enabling business lines to use data more effectively. So those are some of the more quantified business value measures. Some of the things that we actively measure to kind of see what engagement is like and how it's going up is to look at how people, who's attending which data community events, what's the activity like, how quickly are people responding to things, and different aspects of data literacy within the organization, because we have a big focus of enablement. I must say one metric that I'm most proud of is tracking the number of party crashes. So I talked about how we've built in a lot of engagement, a lot of excitement, a lot of making things relatable or making data cool at the organization. And we've had a lot of success in attracting, of course, the data community, but also the non-data people, or the people who do not know that they're data people yet, in terms of joining us for the data events that we have. And consistently, we've had party crashes, so people who've not, or didn't register, because our registrations always seem to fill out so quickly, but show up for the party anyway. And so those are some key metrics that we've tracked, and we advertise to kind of further generate the excitement or keep that momentum going in terms of driving engagement from the community, from the organization around data literacy.
Great. I think I have to reconsider my evaluation of data people as party people, because you're all about the party, so that's great.
We are the cool kids.
Apparently, no one told me. Maybe we've talked so far about business and people context, and I think people have heard, even though you guys are being humble and you're starting your journey, you're actually in the journey. Many people are still just thinking about it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about organizational context, and maybe people think you got a little bit lucky that you just happened to be in an organization super jazzed about this data literacy thing. But really, when we've spoken in the past, I've heard a bit about experimentation and luck, a bit about sort of bringing this to, one senior leader and getting a blank stare, and another senior leader getting a warm embrace. So it's about being a little bit agile. We use that lowercase a so people don't get too confused. And sometimes you do get lucky and you have a leader who, quote unquote, gets it. But what are some of the ways that you guys have used to make sure that you are, making the most of the situation you're in? I think, John, you shared a situation where you kicked off with some senior leaders and found some really great early feedback, even though it wasn't, cheers and standing on the table, it was worthwhile. So be interested for you to share a little bit that trial and error, experimentation and luck. How does that play into getting a data literacy program off the ground?
Yeah, that is really important. I think there are really two big things that helped us get our program off the ground, even before we got to the experimentation and the luck. The first one is early last year, which is a little bit over a year ago now, we had a new chief data officer join the company who had some experience in data literacy and wanted to do this. And that helps. You've got to have that senior leader who can help set the vision, provide the resources, clear some of the obstacles, make connections with some of those strategic projects that I talked about before. I would say it'd be really, really difficult if you didn't have that support to get an enterprise level program going. Maybe you could do one on a smaller basis or in a department, but to have an enterprise program going, you've got to have that senior vision. The other thing that really helped us is I engaged in a 10-week boot camp last year in the second half of the year to learn about designing and delivering data literacy programs. And this is a pioneering type of boot camp. I think there are 15 or 20 companies that have been through it or in the process of going through it. And that really helped me put some structure to the program and to figure out, well, what kinds of experiments should we do? What are some of the non-negotiables? But what are the things that we can try and pivot? So my workshops, as an example, to introduce the concept have very much been a pilot. The first several of those, I made many tweaks based on feedback. We took examples that people would bring up in the workshop of how they were being data literate or not being data literate back on the job, and we would incorporate those kinds of things. Certainly there's some trial and error there. Like any kind of program, there is program management, there's plans and there's roadmaps, need lots of communications. Need to identify the experts. A colleague that I have at the office calls them data evangelists. I love that term. And you need to find those people to be a part of it. And also, I talked about our 4 levels before. There's a 5th level, maybe level 0, called the data doubter. And I think you have to realize that there are some people who are not going to get on board right away. Don't focus there. Focus on those who are ready to get on board on data literacy, and the doubters will eventually change, maybe peer pressure or something. But if we spend all of our effort on those who really don't care about it, we're not going to make much progress. So I think that's what that's what I have to say on organizational context there.
Fair enough. Very good. So it's a very much alert, alive, agile, responsive. Getting started sounds like the most important step, and then you can kind of tweak it from there. And Shilpan, how about you? It's a different organization, different mindset, different vibe. I don't know that you had the CDAO as John did come in super jazzed, so it's a different context.
Yeah, it's definitely a very different context. And I do what you said, John, in terms of the data evangelists, or, identifying them. We call them the ambassadors, if you can identify them. And then the data doubters, like figuring out where to start, where's the sweet spot. We've taken like a multi-pronged approach, like trying to tackle different parts of it. I don't have any magic bullets or words of wisdom or steps that I can be like, this is what we did, because we approach, I come from an entrepreneurial background. We have a startup kind of mindset where we have experimented and tried out a lot of different options, really, to understand what works, what resonates, what does not work, and why. And Marius, I really like the tracking of the usage dashboard that you shared or you were showing earlier, in terms of I can see how that would be of great value as you iterate through different adaptations, because what an organization needs when also changes. So being able to adapt, being nimble, and coming back at the problem from a different angle is critical, I think. And we have iterated and refined different approaches to improve understanding and the use of data through things like social learning, for example, a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of peer-to-peer learning, and significant gamification for learning, like I talked about earlier. To John's point, yes, we went through the process of identifying who are our champions, who are the evangelists, the ambassadors for data across the organization, and who can really help us make a difference. It was like kind of like, looking at it like planting trees across the organization, which you can then use as a place to grow and flourish and further spread data literacy, right? Taking like an ecosystem or systems approach to it to kind of transform the organization. Yes, there's a lot of trial and error, but I do think having empathy, looking at it from the end user perspective, having the design thinking kind of mindset, and having the adaptability and the ability to come back at the problem, not be like, oh, well, that didn't work. No, try it differently. And understanding what the organization needs is critical for data literacy. It's in my mind, it really is about learning to manage a world where change is the only constant, right? Like even in the data literacy space, you see a lot of, it's still evolving. And so an iterative approach with a continuous improvement kind of mindset, with being very open about being able to adapt and adjust based on the broader organizational dynamics, because a lot changes in the broader context as well, right? And factoring those realities in is critical, I think, for the data literacy program to be effective.
Great, Shilpan. And Marius, take us through a little bit how you can use some of the tools that Metric Insights use to keep this sort of agile, adaptive, responsive approach alive.
Yeah, I think, I think John mentioned that, his experience with senior leadership and having a supportive sort of senior leader. And I think sort of having measurement and having metrics and being able to measure the effectiveness of your literacy program is critical, because of the fact that over time, leadership is going to change. And so if you go back for a second there, so you want to be able to say, okay, if I've, let's say, launched a program to really promote a piece of content, explain how a key dashboard works and what are the things that you really want to how should you engage with it, how should you interpret the data, etc. I want to be able to measure after that, how is that content then used after that? I want to have kind of a time-lapsed view. What you're seeing here is a set of rings, or 1 day, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And it's actually an animation where you can see over time where the users come to a piece of content and stay there, whether they revisit it basically every day or once a week, or does it sort of drift out where they never come back to it. And doing this kind of analysis both from a content-centric perspective as well as a user or group-centric perspective. You launched a data literacy program for your marketing team and put them through a seminar, or provide resources for them that to help them explain their dashboards and understand how they should use data. Well, how well did it work? Did they go back and use that content? Did they come back to it over time, or was it sort of a one and done where they went and looked at content but they never came back to it? In which case, then how can you really claim that data literacy was promoted if there was no measurable improvement in how people actually engage with content? So this kind of analysis we think is really critical to know: are you doing the right things? Like Shilpa said, you're not going to get everything out right out of the gate, so you're going to have to iterate. But the only way to know whether you need to iterate is to have some really reliable measures around usage and engagement that you can go back to as your North Star to know how you're doing. And then if you go to the next slide, the other part of it is, I think Shilpan talked about gamification and sort of the more the publisher side of things, and how engaging everyone in the organization. I think, John alluded to that as well. Data literacy is not just about a small team. It's about getting everybody to promote it within the organization. So you need to also measure to what extent are people engaging in the behavior that will promote that. So in this case, you're looking at a report that looks at, how by analyst, how much certified content has been published. If you determine that, hey, certifying content is one way to promote literacy, because I'm going to be able to let people know what content can be trusted, or whether it's adding release notes or associating things with business glossary or anything like that, measuring that and then gamifying that potentially as well, right? To make it a fun thing. Hey, have a contest. The people that have somebody who has the largest percentage of their content certified or associated with business glossary is going to win a prize. You can be creative with all of that. But the point being that closing that loop and being able to have a mechanism by which you're measuring the actions that your analysts, your data scientists, the folks that are publishing content need to take in order to promote data literacy, and feeding that back to them and using that as a way to continuously improve is an absolutely critical element of making this successful over the long term, right? Because you're going to have points in time where a CIO or CDO is going to come in. They're going to want everybody on the team to justify what they're doing. You're going to need to be able to say, well, here, look, here's how our data literacy program is really successful. Here's the way we're measuring it, not just in subjective ways, but in nuts and bolts numbers that prove the case.
Well, excellent, guys. And firstly, again, apologies for the technical problems at the beginning, and appreciate that everyone stuck with us. We had some questions in chat through the morning and the lunchtime, and it's actually all been answered by the people who were better able to answer it than me, which is Shilpan and John. So thanks for getting right in there with the chat. We didn't even ask you to do it, but you did it. Marius, thanks for connecting so well all the different opportunities. We talked a little bit about connecting to big business programs, and the business programs whose sponsors are the ones that are energetic and see the value of this. We spoke a bit about making sure that this is connected per persona, really relevant to people's life at work. And John, you mentioned make it even relevant to their life at home and outside work. And Shilpan, you saw value in that as well. And then we talked about that organization and about really measuring what you're doing and seeing the results of it and adapting and responding. When it's working, double down. When it's not working, find another way. Really think important also for folks to understand that you should actually just start, right? I think it's easy to get paralyzed on a big thing like this and wait for perfection. But if you just start with a small organization or a small party organization, you'll find success comes pretty quickly. So really appreciate everyone's time, really appreciate everyone's contribution and sharing. The video will be made available. There's a couple really pithy, smart, sharp comments in chat, and I know who said them. So I'm actually going to reach out and let us know if you if we're able to share those comments, and we'll share those with the audience. So people will get this presentation, they'll get this video, and they'll actually get some smart comments from people who are also doing this outside John and Shilpan. And so with that, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody. Thanks, John and Shilpan, especially. Thanks again, Marius. Great to be with you again. And we hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.